Without any further ado, I will introduce our first keynote speaker. George Langlands is joining us today with the presentation Idea Nation, Looking for the Wisdom of the Crowd. George is the lead marketing advisor for the Accident Compensation Corporation, a Crown entity that provides 24/7 no-fault injury cover to all New Zealanders. Working in the injury prevention space, George has worked on falls prevention campaigns for over 5 years and was part of the project team for the crowdsourcing program Idea Nation. He lives in Wellington, New Zealand, with his partner Robin, their son Lucas, 2 cats, 1 dog, and a plethora of other tripping hazards. So welcome, George.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Haynes. And thank you to the organising committee for inviting me to speak at this conference. Coming from spring in New Zealand, I'd especially like to thank for the lovely weather that Sydney's been putting on while we've been here. I'm going to talk to you today about a crowdsourcing initiative that we ran in 2012. The organisation I work for is called the Accident Compensation Corporation, or ACC. In conversations I've had with delegates, it's clear that ACC isn't necessarily that well known outside of New Zealand. So I'll provide a bit of background to explain why we're interested in this area and some of the unique resources that we have at our disposal. ACC is a New Zealand Crown entity. This is kind of like a government department, but we have a slightly different operating model and a slightly different funding structure. We were established 40 years ago by an Act of Parliament to be a no-fault public insurer and cover every New Zealander or visitor New Zealander that's injured in an accident. This removes the blame as the organisation accepts liability regardless of where the accident happens. So if you're injured on the sports field or in a car accident, at work, or even falling at home down your stairs, ACC provides cover. It also extends beyond the treatment of injury to cover rehabilitation and support during the rehabilitation process. So, for example, my sister-in-law was injured in a car accident not that long ago. She was banged up a bit, and apart from bruised pride, the only long-term injury was a broken collarbone that resulted in her being unable to drive for about 4 weeks. So in addition to covering the cost of her treatment and the physiotherapy to help her recover, ACC provided a taxi for her to get to and from work for that period where she couldn't drive. The logic behind this being that if she hadn't been able to get to work, we would have had to have paid her wages, and the cost of a taxi twice a day was a lot less than the salary cost would have been. It also gets her back into the normal routine a lot faster, which we know speeds recovery and has better long-term outcomes. As well as covering care and recovery of those injured in an accident, part of the legislation that ACC acts on states that we have to try and prevent injuries before they happen to reduce our liability and keep New Zealanders safe. To support us in doing this, we have access to a mass of claims data that tells us the location, cost, demographics, and the number of claims that's happening across a range of areas. So as you can see up in that top corner in the blue circle, home and community are by far the most numerous, and within that group, falls, which is the largest of the blue circles, they make up close to half of that number. And this brings us to the problem that we're trying to solve. ACC claims data has shown that 25 to 64-year-olds account for 60% of the cost of falls, and yet we've got very few evidence-based interventions available for falls prevention in this population group. As many of you, I'm sure, will know, and as the makeup of this conference's program supports, the vast majority of research looks at the older part of the population rather than those typically still in employment. In the past, our falls prevention messages to the 25 to 64-year-old age group, a demographic we refer to as the working age population, was focused on DIY safety messages. These are things like making sure people use ladders correctly and asking them to clear up tripping hazards from around them. But all of this was borrowed from industries where they'd done research into these areas, such as the construction industry, or common sense solutions, such as if you pick up your things, you can't trip over them. There wasn't any evidence saying that this would necessarily work in a home setting. It had just all been kind of logical steps we'd taken. So So in 2012, we took the unusual step of asking recently knighted Rugby World Cup winning coach Sir Graham Henry to put out the following challenge on our behalf.
Hi, Graham here. New Zealand has a problem. It costs us hundreds of millions of dollars each year and impacts on ordinary New Zealanders from all walks of life. You could help solve it, and if you do, you could win $10,000. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people, and they could be your brother, friend or colleague, are injured by falls in their homes. Their injuries affect their families, stop them working, and damage their relationships. Those hundreds of millions of dollars could be spent making our country safer and a better place. We're a country of pioneers and innovators. I know that when things get tough, New Zealanders get the job done. So ACC is inviting all New Zealanders to come up with ideas that can reduce falls in the home. Often the causes are simple things, like unstable ladders, slippery tiles, or running around with the kids. But your solution could literally be anything. There's lots more information on the website. Have a look and get thinking. I'm counting on you to surprise me and come up with an idea that makes this country safer.
So our aim was to engage with a range of people not traditionally involved in injury prevention to generate novel ideas that we could then trial and, where successful, roll out on a larger national scale. We named this crowdsourcing initiative Idea Nation. Working with the New Zealand user experience firm Optimal Experience and the advertising agency Y&R, we developed a process to maximise the number of quality ideas we received, be cost efficient, and lead the participants through the process so that a lack of understanding of the field of injury prevention would not be a disadvantage. I should point out at this stage that none of the people involved really knew how to do this. We'd run competitions before and we led brainstorms at work, but nothing that combined these two approaches and nothing that approached the scale of what we were attempting. And I must acknowledge the project team and highlight that I was just one of the group working on this, as well as explaining that there were months of development and planning that went into the process that I'm about to tell you about. Out of this planning stage came two streams of work. The first was a series of forums across New Zealand designed to get new ideas and insight by engaging people who had little exposure to injury prevention before and therefore had no preconceived ideas. But we also wanted these people to have been successful in other fields through using different ways of thinking or a different approach to problem solving. As a pilot, prior to these public forums, we ran 3 internal forums with high-performing ACC staff who had mostly not worked in the injury prevention area before. They were held in the same venues and ran to the same schedule as the public forums, and thus allowed us to fine-tune the process before we invited the public big-picture thinkers along to our forums. Each forum was a full day long and started with an overview of the falls problem by a senior ACC manager, to provide some urgency and to highlight the importance of the work that we were going to do that day. And then this was followed up by an external speaker who had been successful in developing an innovative solution to a large problem. We hope that this would inspire and cultivate a belief that there were solutions out there for hard problems. From there, we began with an icebreaker to get all the people talking and interacting with us at the table. This is kind of normal for these large group situations. And we then followed this with a rundown of the key fall statistics, hoping that this provides some direction for the ideas that they would generate. The next step involved us trying to get the participants to think big. We asked them to look at the problem of falls and imagine that they were working for highly innovative organisations such as Google, Apple or Dyson, and imagine what kind of ideas they might come up with to solve this problem. We were amazed at how successful this was at removing some of the mental blocks. The ideas generated in this exercise included a way to reverse gravity, covering everything in bubble wrap, and my personal favourite, issuing every New Zealander with a robot butler which would follow them around. And that way, if they fell, the robot would catch them before they hit the ground. Their minds were well and truly open. We fed them their lunch and then started the process of refining their approaches to focus on the task back at hand. To put a human face on the problem and help them understand the kind of peoples that they should be designing a solution for, we developed a set of personas to describe the breadth of the working age population affected by falls. For those of you that haven't heard them before, personas are used by marketing and user experience firms, and it's a technique to put a face on the customer that you're designing a product or service for. We used our fall statistics to identify those that were most likely to fall, and then conducted interviews with people who fitted this kind of demographic. And these people that we talked to had had a fall in the previous 18 months. We also spoke to their partners and families where possible, and this helped us provide a really full picture of the person, as well as the time leading up to the fall and the actual fall itself. By putting our quantitative internal statistics and our qualitative interview data together, we came up with the following personas. First off, we had Just Get It Done Justin. Justin was a 40-year-old male living in semi-rural part of New Zealand with his wife Jen and 2 kids. Justin was undertaking the painting of his house. He'd spent all weekend out there putting a coat on the side of the house, and he got to 5 p.m. on Sunday, and he just had one more patch to go. The sun was going down, and rather than moving the improvised kind of scaffold he'd built, he just leaned out a little bit too far to get that last spot. In overstretching, he took a tumble and injured his back and got a mild concussion. As a result, he had to take 3 months off work to recover. The next persona was Didn't Think Dave. Dave was a 34-year-old. People know Dave, yeah? Dave's 34-year-old. He lives in the suburbs of Auckland with his girlfriend and has a pretty sweet life. He's been asked by his girlfriend to get the bedhead down from the storage space because her parents are coming to stay for a couple of days. Without thinking, Dave grabbed a chair, stood on it, and as the bedhead slid down, he lost his balance and fell off the chair. In the tumble, he did something to his knee, but he didn't think much of it. He kind of hobbled through to the next room, and after about 30 minutes, his girlfriend insisted on taking him to the emergency department, where he'd been informed that he'd managed to dislocate his knee in the fall and would need a couple of months of physio to recover and possibly some surgery. Third was Everyday Eve. Eve is in her 50s and lives in the smart part of Wellington with her husband Peter and their 16-year-old son Ben. Eve stepped out of the shower the same as she had every other day, but on this day, as she pulled the shower curtain shut, her foot slipped on the wet tiles and she fell backwards. As she went down, she instinctively put her hands behind her, and Eve ended up hurting her wrist and suffering quite bad bruising to her right leg. Not wanting to cause a fuss, she didn't seek medical attention, and she just hobbled around the house for a couple of weeks. She was really stiff and actually was quite shaken by the fall. Next up, we've got multitasker Mel. Mel's 27, single mum with 3 young kids. She manages to get by, but is really stretched. She's constantly rushing around and doing heaps of things at the same time. Coming back from work, groceries blocked the view of the stairs, and in an instant she misplaced her foot and tripped up the last 3 steps. Mel twisted as she fell to avoid the groceries and landed quite heavily on her left side. After the shock wore off, Mel realised that she was lucky to only have minor injuries and just a bruised hip and a sore elbow. On reflection, Mel recalled that the kids kept on tripping up the stairs, but she'd always put that down to just being kids, rushing about too much. She normally walks up and down those stairs several times during a day, and while she'd tripped before, this is the first time she'd actually fallen. And finally, we had impaired ALEISHA. ALEISHA's 42, single, and has recently moved out of the city to a place on the coast. It means that she's got to commute an hour to work every day, but she loves the lifestyle there. ALEISHA had been working away in Auckland for the past 3 days and got her flight delayed on the way back, which meant that she didn't get home until after midnight. Just as her head hit the pillow, she heard the alarm go off and realised it was 6 in the morning. And even though she was really exhausted, she knew if she didn't make the 7 a.m. train into town, she would miss her 8:30 meeting. So she got ready for work, and she was thinking through her to-do list as she left the house, and she ventured outside and realised it was raining. But the train station was only a couple of minutes away, so instead of turning back for her umbrella, ALEISHA began to run. And a split second later, she was lying on the driveway in pain. She slipped on the smooth, wet concrete, landed awkwardly on her right leg, and when she got to the emergency department, she found out she had broken her leg in 2 places. Hopefully you can see someone you know in those personas. That is kind of the desired effect. We wanted people to approach this with that kind of person in mind, rather than a kind of a bunch of statistics or some homogenous ideal New Zealander. We hope that the forum attendees would begin to design solutions that would apply to their partners, parents, neighbours, or friends, anyone who would fit one of these personas. And so, having introduced them to the personas, we then set our participants designing solutions for this working age falls problem that we had. And we got tens of hundreds of ideas through the forums. People just were throwing things down on these post-it notes. We then took the post-it notes and developed them into more refined ideas, working in small groups, and then they presented them back and people commented and we built on those ideas. So I'll just touch on a couple of things which I thought was really successful in making these forums work. We held the forums in the changing rooms at rugby stadiums. partly because it's not somewhere that people normally go, so we thought this was encourage people to turn up, but also to continue the theme started by the Graham Henry video, and an attempt to inspire the attendees and forge them together as a team. One of the best forums was held in Dunedin, where we had a small number of high-achieving high school students attend. The introduction of these young adults brought a really different feel to the event. They started quite shy at first, but once they got started, they dived right in, and they actually challenged the adults heaps, and they got them to think bigger and come up with different solutions rather than kind of traditional approaches. All of these ideas generated for the forums were collected together and added to the second stream of work, our public crowdsourcing competition. This was open to anyone in New Zealand, and we encouraged the public to submit their ideas for preventing falls in the home. As an incentive, we offered prizes of $10,000 across 4 categories: secondary students, tertiary students, businesses, and the general public. The cost of the competition was part funded by a 3-way public-private arrangement between Placemakers, which is a retail hardware chain, Resine, a New Zealand paint manufacturer, and ACC. Submissions were made through the Idea Nation website, and in order to attract the 4 groups, we ran promotions online, sent direct mail to secondary schools and design-led businesses, advertised through professional bodies such as the Master Builders Association and the Designers Guild of New Zealand, and we ran adverts in all of the New Zealand university magazines. Graham Henry once again featured really heavily in our promotion, and his recognition among the New Zealand public greatly helped raise our profile. Evidence of this was the online banner which ran on yahoo.co.nz to promote Idea Nation, which at the time was the most successful banner that they'd ever had. Over the 6 weeks that the competition was opened, we had over 600 submissions, and at the close of the competition, it became apparent that there was an unusually large number of ideas focused on ladders and preventing falls from them. So we added a 5th category for ideas that involve preventing falls from ladders. The winners were this lot. That first group up the top was a collaboration between a video game designer and an online learning business, and they came together to propose a video game app that used proven gaming and interactive teaching techniques to teach adults and children about home hazards and risk management in a fun and accessible way. And we had a photography major from University of Auckland who came up with the idea of a retractable step that's engineered into the skirting board of a house to provide a step right around the outside of a room. And it would be ready when it's needed, and therefore avoid the need for the homeowner to use an unstable improvised ladder such as a dining room chair. The high school group in that category was won by a young enterprise group who entered the shower gutter. This device collects water from along the bottom of glass doors and funnels it back into the shower to stop water pooling on bathroom floors. In the middle there's a family from Taupo, which is a town about halfway down the North Island of New Zealand, and they developed a new take on educating primary school children that would encourage them to take falls prevention ideas home, work on them with their parents, and hopefully keep their homes safe. And finally, we had a first-year engineering student who proposed an attachment for the base of ladders which combined a leveller with a tilt alarm. And so this would warn the user if there was a danger of overbalancing when using the ladder. These ideas, along with all of the ones which were submitted through the website, so not just the winners, but everything that was submitted, as well as the ideas from the forums, were then combined and put through a refinement stage that rated the ideas across a number of different categories. These categories were the delightfully mouthful applicability. This asked how closely linked was the idea to actually preventing falls in the working age population. An airbag that flew out from your stairs to catch parents that trip due to toys being left on the top of the steps, actually on this category would have scored really highly because it would have prevented a fall from happening in that target group. But someone who entered a robot that stops 70-year-olds from getting paper cuts would only score 1. And even then, I'd only give them a 1 because they had a robot in their idea. Impact looked at what impact the idea would have on ACC's cost of injuries. An idea that addressed a frequently and costly injury, such as a broken ankle, would score a lot higher than an intervention to prevent infrequent low-cost injuries, such as a bruised thumb. Reach measured how many New Zealanders would be affected by the idea. So a low score would be an idea which the beneficiaries would be 20-year-old accountants who live in Tokoroa, scuba dive on the weekend, have an interest in the works of Japanese novelist Hiro Nakamura, and drive a Volvo 1977 245DL, while a high score would have been given to an idea that targeted everybody who watched X Factor, for example. Costs looked at the investment needed. Was this a case of having the money available in this year's budget so we can get going straight away? Or would we need to set up an entirely new funding stream so that we could justify to the ACC board why it was a good idea? Time simply put a figure on how long it would take for the idea to go into action. Was it a case of getting done by the end of the next 6 months? Or would we have to wait for the next appearance of Halley's Comet before we're ready? And the final criteria was capability. Did we have the right stuff already hanging around? Or would we need to develop materials develop materials, resources, staff, and structures from scratch in order to make this work? Internal experts in injury prevention worked through each of these entries, and they worked through all the criteria and scored them, and then we got a panel of experts from outside of ACC to moderate the findings. In addition to choosing just the top scorers, the judges were also able to flag ideas that they thought may not have scored highly, but had a really good kind of nugget in there that we should define more. These wildcard ideas were put through to the next round as well. And after this round of judging, we had 42 ideas that we then put through a refinement and prioritisation phase, where we ran whole-day workshops with ACC staff to consider each of the final 42 and put them into one of 4 groups. They were consider for trial, enter into existing ACC work streams, pass on to another organisation to develop where ACC wasn't necessarily the best people to advance this, or park for now. So it might be a good idea, but timing either politically or prioritisation-wise just wasn't right for it. So what happened? We had huge levels of enthusiasm from the forum participants. Our staff loved that they were working on stuff that they didn't normally work on, and the external forum attendees mostly found the day really, really well spent, and over a third of them indicated that they wanted to continue to be involved in the process. We kept them involved by encouraging them to use falls prevention within their classes that they taught at university. We got them to encourage others to enter the competition. Many of them entered the competition themselves. They included details about ideation in their social media, so LinkedIn profiles, Twitter, Facebook, stuff like that. We got them writing newsletters, prints, and online articles about ideation to help publicise the event. And we even got some people wearing ideation t-shirts to other events. 5 ideas were seen as having real potential for significant falls reduction and delivering a positive return on investment. And these were put into a pilot stage. This included the video game app, which became ACC Zombie Home. It's still available. It's still available for download from the iTunes store. There was also the ladder stability alarm that we looked into, and the falls prevention in schools idea. At the same time, we needed to get going. So 3 other ideas were added to existing work streams and were put into action straight away. In a number of cases, there were excellent ideas put forward, but a Crown entity just isn't the best place for some of these concepts to be nurtured, and mainly these are ideas for new products. So in this case, for like example, the shower gutter, which the high school students came up with, we put them in touch with business incubators or designers or engineers to help them develop the concept. And also, ideation, away from just generating ideas, was a really good way of increasing awareness of the problem amongst the New Zealand public through our online and direct mail and print advertising. And also, we now have a way to run this again for other ideas. We've got a process set up that we can take off the shelf, and if we want to try and find a way to prevent falls on motorcycles or prevent accidents on the sports field, we can run this again. So what are our main takeaways? Invite way more people than you think you're going to need if you're going to ask them to give up a day of their time. In order to get 150 people to belong to the forums, we sent out over 500 invitations. Get a Knight of the Realm or World Cup winner to be your spokesperson. When we asked participants why they attended or why they entered, the majority said that they were intrigued by the idea of something that Sir Graham Henry was willing to endorse. Many of the best ideas came from university students, so if anyone's thinking of doing something similar, I would say start with them. I don't know whether they came up with the best ideas because they haven't yet been beaten down and let their ideas fly, or whether they've just got a lot of time on their hands. Don't let the competition close midnight on a Friday. because not only did a certain staff member have to stay up until midnight to make sure that the competition was closed, when it didn't close, I then had to phone a very grumpy website developer and get him to shut it down. If you're going to do something like this, make it end midday on a Monday. It saves you a lot of hassle. A major learning from this project was that while we believed we had a culture of innovation at ACC, we had some real opposition, both during the setup, execution, and after ideation. Most of the time, it was down to lack of understanding about what we were trying to achieve, but some of it was also due to people not really thinking that this is where we should be spending our money. There was also an issue with some of our major supporters and staff who had worked on it moving on. So as people joined the project, they didn't necessarily understand exactly what our goals and what the process was. I think we expected the ideas to be embraced and championed, while in reality they didn't always fit into the existing processes that we had in place, and so it was really hard to nurture them and get them to work. I guess what I'm trying to say here is there's a reason why tech startups and app developers tend to be small, agile businesses rather than large public sector organisations. And finally, everybody has an opinion. Crowdsourcing is an amazing way to generate ideas. Yes, health professionals and academics are the experts in this field, but it really helps to get out there and ask people who are actually going to be affected by the falls what they think and what the best way is to solve their problems. We didn't find a silver bullet or the holy grail around preventing falls in the home, but amongst the working age population, it definitely helped ACC in New Zealand sit up and look at the problem in a new way. Thank you.